I never thought buying my dream property in rural Colorado would turn into a legal nightmare. But then again, I never expected to meet Susan Thornton either. My name is Patrick Navarro, and I had spent 15 years working as a software engineer in Denver, saving every penny I could to buy a piece of land where I could finally breathe. When I found 20 acres near Boulder County with a small cabin and a trout stream running through it, I knew it was perfect. The property had been in the same family for 3 generations, and they had maintained a gravel lane that connected their land to the main county road. The lane was entirely on my property, documented clearly in the survey and deed. It was mine, every pebble of it. The previous owners had warned me about the HOA in the neighboring development called Pinecrest Estates. They had built their subdivision about 10 years ago, right next to my property line, and apparently, some residents had gotten into the habit of using my gravel lane as a shortcut to avoid going around the long way through their own streets. The old owners had been too tired to fight about it and just let it happen. But the deed was crystal clear. This was a private lane on private property, not an easement, not a public road, just mine. I moved in on a beautiful Saturday morning in April, watching the movers haul my furniture into the cabin while I stood on the porch with a cup of coffee. The air smelled like pine and freedom. I had plans to renovate the cabin, maybe build a workshop, do some fishing, and just enjoy the quiet life I had been dreaming about for so long. That peace lasted exactly 4 days. On Wednesday afternoon, I was out by the stream trying to figure out where to put a small dock when I heard a car horn blaring. Not just a polite beep, but a sustained, aggressive honking that echoed through the trees. I walked back up toward the cabin and saw a white Mercedes SUV stopped halfway down my gravel lane. A woman had gotten out and was standing next to her vehicle with her hands on her hips, staring at my truck which I had parked near the cabin. "Excuse me," she called out when she saw me approaching. "You need to move your vehicle immediately. You are blocking the road." I looked at my truck, which was parked well off to the side of the lane on my own property, then back at her. "I am not blocking anything. This is my driveway." She walked toward me with quick, sharp steps. She was maybe 50 years old, wearing yoga pants and a designer jacket, with blonde highlights that looked expensive and a face that seemed permanently arranged into an expression of disapproval. "This is a shared access road. I am Susan Thornton, president of the Pinecrest Estates HOA, and we have been using this road for years. You cannot simply block access." I took a deep breath, reminding myself to stay calm. "Madam, this is not a shared road. This is a private lane on my property. I own it. It is in my deed." Her eyes narrowed. "That is ridiculous. This has been a community access point for a decade. You cannot just change that because you bought the property." "I did not change anything. It has always been private property. The previous owners just did not enforce it." I pulled out my phone and showed her the property survey I had saved. "See this line? That is my property boundary. The entire lane is inside that boundary." Susan barely glanced at the phone. "I do not care what some paper says. We have established use. That means easement by prescription." "You clearly do not understand property law." Actually, I had done quite a bit of research before buying the property, and I knew that Colorado required 20 years of continuous, open, and adverse use to establish a prescriptive easement. The subdivision was only 10 years old. But I did not want to get into a legal debate on my front lawn. "Look, Miss Thornton, I am not trying to cause problems, but this is my property, and I would appreciate it if you used the proper roads through your development." "The proper road adds 15 minutes to my drive," she snapped. "This is absurd. I am calling an emergency HOA meeting about this. You will be hearing from our attorney." Your attorney can call my attorney, I said, though I did not actually have an attorney yet. Have a good day. She stared at me for another long moment, then turned and marched back to her Mercedes. She had to do a complicated three-point turn to get back out of the lane, and I could see her face red with anger through the windshield as she drove past me. I thought that would be the end of it for a while. I was wrong. The next morning, I found a letter stuck to my door. It was from the Pinecrest Estates HOA, addressed to the owner of 4472 Mountain View Lane, which was not even my actual address. My property did not have a street address because it predated the subdivision. I used a P.O. box in town. The letter informed me that I was in violation of community standards and was required to pave my gravel lane within 30 days to meet shared infrastructure requirements. It also demanded that I install proper lighting along the lane and maintain it to HOA specifications. At the bottom, it threatened fines of $500 per day for non-compliance. I actually laughed out loud when I read it. I was not part of their HOA. My property was not in their subdivision. They had absolutely no authority over me. I crumpled up the letter and tossed it in the recycling bin, but Susan Thornton was not done. Over the next week, 3 more cars came down my lane, and each driver seemed surprised when I told them it was private property. One guy actually argued with me for 20 minutes, insisting that his real estate agent had told him the lane was public access when he bought his house. A woman told me that she had been using it daily for 8 years, and I could not stop her now. I remained polite but firm with all of them. Then Susan escalated. I woke up one morning to the sound of machinery. I pulled on jeans and a shirt and ran outside to find a paving crew at the entrance of my lane with a roller and a truck full of asphalt. Susan was standing there with a clipboard, directing them. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, running down the lane. Susan turned to me with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "Since you refuse to comply with the paving requirement, the HOA has decided to perform the work ourselves. You will be billed for the cost, of course. You cannot pave my property without my permission." I stepped in front of the roller, which had just started moving. "Stop right now." The operator looked confused and turned off the engine. "Lady, is this guy the property owner?" "He is being difficult about a shared access situation," Susan said smoothly. "We have the authority to maintain community infrastructure." "No, you do not." I pulled out my phone and called 911. "Yes, I need to report trespassing and property damage. Someone is trying to pave my private driveway without permission." That got everyone's attention. The paving crew foreman walked over. "Look, man, we are just contractors. If this is a property dispute, we are not getting involved." He turned to Susan. "Lady, you said you had authorization from the property owner." "I have authorization from the HOA board," Susan said, her voice rising. "But does the HOA own this land?" the foreman asked. "That is not the point." "Yeah, it is the point," the foreman said. He waved to his crew. "Pack it up. We are leaving." "Madam, you still owe us for the call-out fee." Susan's face turned an impressive shade of purple. "You cannot just leave. We have a contract. Contract says we pave roads, not that we get involved in property disputes or possible trespassing. Have your lawyer call our lawyer." The crew started loading their equipment back onto the trucks. A sheriff's deputy arrived about 15 minutes later, just as the paving crew was driving away. I explained the situation and showed him my property deed and survey. He looked it over, then turned to Susan. "Madam, is your HOA claiming ownership of this lane?" "We are claiming established use," Susan said stiffly, "which grants us an easement. You have a legal document establishing that easement. We are working with our attorney on that." The deputy sighed. "Madam, Until you have a court order or legal easement, this is private property and you cannot perform work on it without the owner's permission. If you try again, he can press charges for trespassing and property damage." Susan opened her mouth to argue, but the deputy held up his hand. "I am not a judge. If you think you have a legal claim, take it to court, but you cannot take matters into your own hands." He turned to me. "Sir, you have the right to post no trespassing signs and restrict access to your property. If anyone ignores those signs, call us and we can cite them." "Thank you, officer," I said after the deputy left. Susan stood on my property for another moment, glaring at me. "This is not over, Mr. Navarro. The HOA has resources and we will not allow you to disrupt our community." "Your community is over there." I pointed toward Pinecrest Estates. "This is my property over here. Pretty simple boundary." She got in her Mercedes and drove away, spraying gravel as she went. I spent that afternoon installing a heavy-duty gate at the entrance to my lane where it met the county road. It was a beautiful piece of work, wrought iron with a lock that could not be easily cut. I also put up clear no trespassing signs on both sides. My property, my rules. The next few days were quiet, and I started to hope that maybe Susan had given up. I should have known better. The following Tuesday, I found a certified letter in my P.O. box. It was from a law firm in Boulder representing the Pinecrest Estates, HOA. The letter claimed that the HOA had established a prescriptive easement over my lane through continuous use and demanded that I remove the gate immediately. It threatened a lawsuit if I did not comply within 10 days. That afternoon, I called every real estate attorney in Boulder County until I found one who specialized in property disputes. Her name was Margaret Chen, and she had great reviews online. When I explained the situation, she actually chuckled. "Let me guess, Pinecrest Estates. You have heard of them?" "Oh yeah. Susan Thornton has been involved in about half a dozen property disputes with neighbors over the years. She has this habit of thinking HOA rules apply to everyone in a 5-mile radius. How long has the subdivision existed? About 10 years, according to the previous owner. And Colorado requires 20 years for a prescriptive easement. They do not have a case, but that will not stop them from filing. Do you want me to send them a response, please?" Margaret drafted a response letter that politely but firmly explained that no easement existed, that my property was clearly private, and that any lawsuit would be frivolous and potentially subject to sanctions. She sent it off the next day. For a week, nothing happened. I started to relax, spending my days working on the cabin and exploring my land. The stream was full of rainbow trout, and I spent several peaceful afternoons fly fishing. This was exactly the life I had wanted. Then I noticed cars parked along the county road near my gate. At first it was just 1 or 2, but by the end of the week, there were 5 or 6 vehicles parked there every morning. People were walking around my locked gate and using my lane anyway. I called the sheriff's office, and the same deputy came out. He looked at the situation and shook his head. "The county road is public property. We cannot stop people from parking there. And technically, if they climb around the gate without damaging it, it is a civil matter, not criminal trespass. You would have to take each person to civil court. So I am just supposed to let people walk all over my property?" I did not say that. "You could put up fencing along both sides of the lane. Then if they climb the fence, it becomes clearer criminal trespass." I called a fencing company that afternoon. They could not start for 2 weeks, but they gave me a quote for installing split-rail fencing with no-climb wire mesh along both sides of the lane from the gate all the way to my cabin. It was going to cost me $8,000, but at this point, it was worth it. In the meantime, I started documenting everyone who walked around my gate. I sat in my truck near the entrance each morning with my camera, taking photos and noting license plates. Most people had the decency to look embarrassed when they saw me. A few ignored me. One guy actually flipped me off. On day 3 of my surveillance, Susan herself showed up. She parked her Mercedes, got out and walked straight toward the gate while staring at me defiantly. I rolled down my window. "Miss Thornton, you are trespassing on posted private property." "Sue me," she said, and walked right around the gate. I called the sheriff's office and requested that they send someone out to document it. When the deputy arrived, Susan was long gone, but I showed him the photos I had taken. He seemed sympathetic, but explained that for a misdemeanor trespass, he would need to witness it himself, or I would have to press charges through the district attorney's office, which would be a lengthy process. "What you need," the deputy said, "is a restraining order if she keeps harassing you. Or you need to make it physically impossible for them to access your property." The fencing company started work the following Monday. The crew worked fast, and within a week, I had beautiful split-rail fencing running along both sides of the lane, reinforced with wire mesh that would be very difficult to climb. I also installed a security camera at the gate with a clear view of anyone who approached. The first morning after the fence was complete, I checked the camera footage. 3 people had walked up to the gate, seen that they could not easily get around it anymore, and turned back to their cars. Success. But at noon, I got an alert from the camera. I pulled up the live feed and saw Susan at the gate with a man in a suit. They were examining the fence and talking. Then the man pulled out a camera and started taking pictures. I grabbed my keys and drove down to the gate. "Good afternoon," I called out as I approached. "Can I help you?" The man in the suit turned. "Are you Patrick Navarro?" "I am." He handed me a business card. "I am Gerald Foster, attorney for the Pinecrest Estates HOA. I am documenting this illegal blockage of a community access road." "It is not a community access road. It is my private driveway." "That is a matter of interpretation. We have filed suit in Boulder County District Court. You will be served within the next few days. I strongly suggest you remove this gate and fencing before the hearing. The judge is not going to look kindly on you blocking access that has been used by residents for a decade. Your subdivision has only existed for 10 years, which is less than the 20 years required for a prescriptive easement in Colorado. My attorney already explained this to you." Gerald smiled coldly. "There are other legal theories we are pursuing. Estoppel, for instance. The previous owner allowed access, and residents relied on that to their detriment when purchasing homes. And then there is the question of whether you are operating a commercial enterprise on this property, which would trigger different zoning regulations. A commercial enterprise. I live here. I am not running a business. We have evidence of heavy equipment and construction materials being delivered. That suggests commercial activity. That was the fencing company, which I hired because your HOA members would not stop trespassing." Susan spoke up for the first time. "You are being an absolutely terrible neighbor, Mr. Navarro. All we are asking for is reasonable access to a road that has served this community for years. Instead, you are creating conflict and causing people to drive extra miles out of their way, burning fuel, contributing to pollution. You should be ashamed of yourself." I almost laughed at the audacity. "Miss Thornton, you do not have the right to cross someone else's property just because it is convenient for you. That is not how property law works. It is how community spirit works," she shot back. "But clearly you do not care about being part of a community." "I am not part of your community. I do not live in Pinecrest Estates. I am not subject to your HOA. Gerald cut in. "You will be hearing from the court. I suggest you get a good attorney." They both walked back to Susan's Mercedes and drove away. I immediately called Margaret Chen and told her about the lawsuit. She requested that I forward any court documents as soon as I was served and assured me that we had a strong case. They are trying to intimidate you into giving up. These kinds of bullying tactics work on a lot of people, but we have the law on our side. The lawsuit was filed 3 days later. I was served by a process server who apologized for the intrusion. The complaint was 30 pages long and cited a bunch of legal theories about why the HOA should have an easement across my property. It demanded that the court order me to remove the gate and fencing, pave the lane to HOA standards, and maintain it in perpetuity. It also asked for attorney's fees and damages. Margaret filed a response denying all the claims and laying out our defenses. She also filed a motion to dismiss, arguing that the HOA had no valid legal basis for any of its claims. "This is going to take a while to work through the system," she warned me. "Court dockets are backed up. We might not get a hearing for 6 months. 6 months of this, maybe longer, but you are not doing anything wrong. Just keep documenting any trespassing. Do not engage with Susan or anyone from the HOA, and let me handle the legal side." I tried to follow her advice, but Susan made it difficult. She started sending me emails, sometimes 3 or 4 a day, alternating between threats and attempts at negotiation. One day she would threaten to sue me for everything I owned. The next day she would offer to settle if I just allowed access from 7 to 9 in the morning. I forwarded everything to Margaret and did not respond. Then things got weird. I started getting notices from Boulder County about supposed code violations on my property. First, it was a complaint that I was storing junked vehicles, which was absurd since I only owned 1 truck and it was in perfect condition. An inspector came out, looked around, found nothing, and closed the complaint. Then I got a notice about unpermitted construction. Another inspector came out, saw that the cabin had existed for decades and the fence was not the type of structure that required permits, and closed that complaint too. "Someone is filing false reports," the second inspector told me. "It happens sometimes in neighbor disputes. Just document everything in case you need to get a restraining order." The harassment continued in other ways. Someone dumped a load of garbage at the entrance to my lane, right in front of the gate. I had to spend a morning cleaning it up and hauling it to the dump. My mailbox at the post office was broken into, though nothing was stolen. Someone spray-painted "Share the Road" on the fence near the gate. I installed more security cameras to cover the entire perimeter near the county road. 2 nights later, the cameras caught 3 teenagers vandalizing the fence. I did not recognize them, but I could clearly see them getting out of a car registered to an address in Pinecrest Estates. I turned the footage over to the sheriff's office, and deputies went to talk to the homeowner. Apparently, Susan Thornton had hired the kids to do yard work and mentioned that someone had been mean to the neighborhood. The kids thought they were helping. The homeowner apologized profusely and paid for the damage to the fence. The kids were cited for vandalism. I thought maybe that would send a message that this behavior had consequences. Instead, Susan doubled down. I woke up one morning to find that someone had planted survey stakes along my fence line during the night, marked with orange tape. The stakes showed a property line about 10 feet inside my actual boundary, which would have put part of my lane outside my property. I pulled them all up and called Margaret. "That is surveyor fraud," she said immediately. "That is actually a criminal offense in Colorado. You need to call the sheriff and report it." I did, and a different deputy came out to take a report. He photographed where the stakes had been and took one of them as evidence. "Do you know who did this?" I am in a property dispute with the HOA next door. I assume it was them. We will investigate. In the meantime, you might want to hire your own surveyor to do an official boundary survey, just to have the documentation. I hired a licensed surveyor who came out the next week. He confirmed that my property boundary was exactly where my deed said it was, and that the mysterious survey stakes had been completely fraudulent. He prepared an official report and filed it with the county. The cost was $2,000. The court hearing on the HOA's lawsuit was scheduled for October, 5 months after I had been served. In the meantime, summer arrived and I tried to enjoy my property despite the ongoing conflict. I did some fishing, started building a workshop, and generally lived the quiet life I had moved out here for. The gate and fence kept most people out, and I had gotten into a routine of checking the security cameras each morning. In late August, Margaret called with news. The judge granted our motion to dismiss most of the HOA's claims. The only thing still alive is their argument about estoppel, and even that is weak. We have a hearing next month where I think we can get the whole case thrown out. That is great news. It is. But I should warn you, Susan Thornton called my office yesterday trying to negotiate. She said the HOA would drop the lawsuit if you agreed to allow access during morning commute hours, 7 to 9 a.m. on weekdays. Absolutely not. This is my property. That is what I told her. Just wanted you to know they are feeling the pressure. Their attorney's fees are probably adding up, and they know they are going to lose. The hearing in September went exactly as Margaret predicted. The judge listened to both sides, reviewed the evidence, and dismissed the entire lawsuit with prejudice, meaning the HOA could not refile. He also ordered the HOA to pay my attorney's fees, which had reached $15,000 by that point. This was a frivolous lawsuit from the beginning, the judge said sternly, looking at Gerald Foster. The property boundaries are clearly documented. There is no easement, no prescriptive rights, and no valid legal claim. The HOA cannot simply decide that someone else's private property is a public road because it is convenient. I am awarding fees to discourage this kind of abusive litigation. I should have been thrilled. I had won. The court had vindicated my property rights. But when I got home that afternoon, I found that someone had cut the lock on my gate and driven through my lane, tearing up the gravel and leaving deep ruts. The security camera showed it was Susan's white Mercedes. I called the sheriff's office immediately. This time, they sent 2 deputies. I showed them the video footage, which clearly showed Susan cutting the lock with bolt cutters, driving through, and then leaving about 30 minutes later. She had not even tried to hide her face. That is criminal trespass, destruction of property, and possibly burglary depending on what she was doing here, one of the deputies said. We will go talk to her now. I went with them to Pinecrest Estates. Susan's house was a large 2-story colonial at the back of the subdivision, with a perfectly manicured lawn and a Range Rover in the driveway next to the Mercedes. The deputies knocked on the door, and Susan answered wearing tennis whites. Can I help you, officers? Madam, we have video evidence showing you cutting a lock and trespassing on Mr. Navarro's property earlier today. Can you explain that? Susan's composure cracked for just a second before she recovered. I have no idea what you are talking about. I have been at the tennis club all afternoon. Madam, we have clear video of you and your vehicle. This is serious. We need you to come down to the station to answer some questions. I am not going anywhere without my attorney. That is your right, but we are placing you under arrest for criminal trespass and criminal mischief. The deputy pulled out handcuffs. Susan's face went white, then red. This is insane. You cannot arrest me. I am the HOA president. I was checking on a property that should be community access. This is a misunderstanding. You can explain all that to the judge. Turn around, please, madam." They arrested her right there on her front porch. Several neighbors had come out to watch, attracted by the police cars. I saw cameras on phones recording the whole thing. Susan was shouting about harassment and abuse of power as they put her in the back of the patrol car. One of the neighbors approached me as the police cars drove away. "Are you the guy with the property next door?" "Yeah." "Good for you. Susan has been making everyone's life miserable for years with her HOA nonsense. Last month she tried to fine me $500 because my lawn had some weeds. Maybe this will finally calm her down." I went home and installed a new, heavier lock on the gate. I also welded some additional reinforcement to make sure no one could ram through it. Susan was released on bail the next day. Within a week, I received a notice that there would be an emergency HOA meeting to discuss recent events. Out of curiosity, I looked up the public records. Apparently, several homeowners in Pinecrest Estates had started a petition to remove Susan as HOA president. The arrest had been the final straw for a lot of people who were already tired of her aggressive management style. Margaret called me a few days later. Gerald Foster, the HOA's attorney, called me. "Apparently, Susan has been removed as president and the new board wants to formally apologize and drop all issues with you. They are acknowledging that your lane is private property and they have no claim to it." That is good to hear. There is one more thing. Susan's criminal case is moving forward. The DA is taking it seriously because of the documented pattern of harassment. She could face jail time, though more likely probation and restitution. But I wanted you to know that you might be called as a witness. Over the next few months, things finally started to calm down. The new HOA board sent me a formal letter of apology and confirmed they would no longer attempt to use my lane or claim any rights to it. They even offered to contribute to repairing the damage Susan had caused, but I declined. I just wanted to be left alone. Susan's criminal case went to trial in December. I testified about the months of harassment, the vandalism, and finally her cutting through my gate. The prosecutor had assembled an impressive case, including all the false code complaints, the fraudulent survey stakes, and witness testimony from other people Susan had bullied over the years as HOA president. The judge was not sympathetic. Susan was convicted of criminal trespass, criminal mischief, and filing false police reports. She was sentenced to 6 months in jail, suspended on condition of 2 years probation, 500 hours of community service, and restitution of $35,000 to cover all my costs including attorney's fees, the fence, the gate repairs, and the surveyor. She was also ordered to have no contact with me in January, almost a full year after I had moved in. I finally got to enjoy my property in peace. The gate stayed locked, the fence stayed intact, and no one bothered me. I finished the workshop and started building custom furniture, which turned into a nice little side business. The trout stream became my favorite place to unwind after a day of work. The Pinecrest Estates HOA continued under new management, and I heard through the grapevine that they were much more reasonable. Several neighbors who had been living in fear of Susan's fines and threats had visibly relaxed. One couple even apologized to me for using my lane in the past, explaining they had been afraid of Susan's retaliation if they did not follow her instructions. I ran into the guy who had flipped me off at the grocery store in town one afternoon. He looked uncomfortable when he recognized me. "Hey man, I want to apologize for that. Susan had us all convinced that you were some kind of jerk who was blocking a public road. I did not know the real story." "No worries," I said. "It is all sorted out now." Yeah, I heard she got convicted. Honestly, it is a relief. She was making everyone miserable with her HOA rules. My wife got a fine for hanging Christmas lights up 2 days before the approved date. It was crazy. By spring, I had been on my property for a full year. I stood on my porch one morning with a cup of coffee, listening to the stream and watching deer graze near the tree line. This was exactly what I had dreamed about during all those years in Denver. Peace, quiet, and the freedom to live on my own land without interference. The gate stayed locked except when I needed to drive in or out. The fence stayed strong. And Susan Thornton stayed far away, working off her community service hours at a local food bank, hopefully learning something about respecting other people's property rights. My property was mine, every acre of it, and I planned to keep it that way for as long as I lived there. The gravel lane remained gravel, not paved to anyone's HOA specifications but my own. It was perfect exactly as it was, crunching under my tires every time I came home, reminding me that this place was truly mine and that I had fought to protect it. The legal battle had cost me time, money, and stress, but it had been worth it. Property rights matter. Boundaries matter. And sometimes you have to stand firm against bullies, even when they have an HOA behind them, and think that gives them authority over the world. I never regretted buying that land. I never regretted standing my ground. And I certainly never regretted locking that gate and making it clear that my private property was exactly that, private. Susan Thornton had learned that lesson the hard way, through arrest, conviction, and a hefty restitution payment. The HOA had learned it through a dismissed lawsuit and attorney's fees. And the neighborhood had learned it by watching the whole thing unfold. Some people think moving to a rural area means escaping from rules and regulations. They are half right. You escape from a lot of the city nonsense, but you have to be prepared to defend your rights when someone tries to impose their rules on you. That is what I did, and my property was better for it. The next few years passed peacefully. I expanded the workshop, started selling furniture at local craft fairs, and even hired an apprentice from town who wanted to learn woodworking. The stream continued to provide excellent fishing, and I finally built that dock I had been planning. I added solar panels to the cabin roof, installed a better well pump, and generally improved the property at my own pace, in my own way, without anyone telling me I needed to pave anything or meet any HOA standards. Susan Thornton finished her probation without incident from what I heard. She moved away from Pinecrest Estates shortly after, selling her colonial house and relocating somewhere out of state. The new HOA president was a retired school teacher named Bob, who believed in minimal intervention and maximum freedom for homeowners. The neighborhood seemed much happier under his leadership. I occasionally saw people from Pinecrest Estates at local businesses or community events. Most were friendly. A few apologized again for the whole mess. Many admitted they had been intimidated by Susan and were relieved when her reign as HOA president ended. One woman told me that Susan had tried to fine her $3,000 for painting her front door the wrong shade of blue, a shade that was literally one tint off from the approved color chart. The new board had thrown out all of Susan's pending fines and started fresh with reasonable rules. One afternoon in late summer, about 3 years after the whole ordeal began, I was sitting on my porch when a car pulled up to my gate. It was a young couple with a baby in a car seat. The man got out and waved. I walked down to the gate. "Hi, sorry to bother you," he said. "We just bought a house in Pinecrest Estates, and we heard there was a story about this lane. Someone told us to come talk to you if we ever needed to know the truth about the HOA history." I gave him the short version of the story. His eyes got wider as I talked. "Wow," he said when I finished. Our real estate agent made it sound like the HOA was super strict but fair. She did not mention any of that. "The HOA is fine now. New leadership. Just make sure you read your CC and Articles carefully and understand what you are agreeing to. And remember, HOA rules only apply to property within the HOA boundaries. They cannot tell people outside the subdivision what to do. Good to know. Thanks for your time." They drove away and I went back to my porch. That night, I sat outside watching the stars, something I could never really do in Denver because of the light pollution. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light. An owl hooted from somewhere in the trees. The stream gurgled in the background. This was worth fighting for. This peace, this freedom, this connection to the land. I had spent 15 years saving for it, and then another year defending it, but now it was truly mine in every sense of the word. No one could take it away or tell me what to do with it. My gravel lane remained gravel, worn smooth by my truck tires and weather, winding through the pines from the county road to my cabin. It was not up to HOA specifications. It was not paved. It was not lit by street lamps or marked with reflectors. It was just a simple gravel lane on private property, exactly as it should be. And the gate stayed locked, keeping out those who did not belong and protecting what I had worked so hard to achieve. That lock was more than just security. It was a symbol of property rights, of boundaries respected, of the right to live your life on your own terms on your own land. Susan Thornton had tried to take that away with her demands and her lawsuits and her harassment. She had failed. The law had been on my side because the law protects property rights, even when an HOA president thinks she knows better. Even when convenience seems to trump ownership. Even when someone has been getting away with crossing boundaries for years. I never did pave that gravel lane. I never installed HOA-approved lighting. I never opened the gate for morning commute hours or weekend shortcuts. My property remained mine, used by me, maintained by me, controlled by me. That is how property ownership is supposed to work. The whole experience taught me something important about standing firm when you are in the right. It would have been easier to just let people keep using the lane. It would have saved me thousands in legal fees and fencing costs. It would have avoided conflict with the neighbors. But it would have also meant surrendering my property rights bit by bit until they were gone completely. Sometimes the easy path leads to places you do not want to go. Sometimes you have to choose the harder path, the one with conflict and expense and stress, because it is the right path. Because your rights matter. Because boundaries matter. Because property ownership means something. As I finally headed inside for the night, I took one last look at my land, my cabin, my workshop, my stream, my trees, and my gravel lane leading away into the darkness. All of it mine. All of it protected. All of it worth every moment of the fight. The gate would stay locked. The fence would stay strong. And I would stay here, living the life I had dreamed about, on the property I had fought to protect, for as many years as I had ahead of me. Susan Thornton was just a memory now, a cautionary tale about what happens when HOA power goes to someone's head, and they forget that their authority has limits. My property was my sanctuary, my achievement, my home. No HOA would ever change that. The gravel lane was staying exactly as it was, a private drive on private land, and anyone who did not like it could take the long way around through their own subdivision streets, just as they should have been doing all along.